We welcome Jesse Simonton, who is at the coaches convention in Nashville. How's everybody, Jesse? How are the polo shirts? Are the head coaches walking through the lobby pretending to be on their phones so 90 people don't come up trying to ask for a job?
Well, you know what? A lot of head coaches are back at their schools trying to keep their rosters intact. The I would say some of the folks here have played off that. I would call that the Jimbo Fisher. I think that's a classic Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher sometimes would have two phones in both ears. Um, the way
He's just
this
talking to recruits, Jesse.
the way this convention set up at the Gaylord, there's a lot of different doors for them to go in and out of if they want to sneak in. So it's funny. This is going to be this is a 4-day convention this year. It's a little bloated. So it's been newsy behind the scenes, but it's been good. It's been worthwhile.
Well, I am glad, and you dropped a hammer during the NCAA, or during the college football playoff title game with the way too early top 25. And as I just told the people, we shouldn't call it way too early because it's never too early to talk about the 2024 season. Because I don't know about you, Jesse, but I feel like there's so much change coming that we need to keep talking about it just to remind ourselves so that we know who's in what conference and how the playoff system works, like when we get into the season, so we're not surprised. Because I do think there's going to be a lot of casual fans who get to the 2024 season are like, holy crap, what just happened?
Well, I mean, at first glance, and we're gonna run through it, I know, but if you take a look, first glance at my way too early top 25, it's like, holy hell. You know what's gonna be really fun next season? The Big 12 and the ACC. They're not gonna win the national championship. I think I can say that some 12 months out. But those two conferences have a lot of teams that are going to be competitive, and it really is a crapshoot. It's just like it's putting a bunch of balls in a bag, shaking it up, and rolling it out, and saying, "All right, these are the two numbers that you're going to pick to play for those each title game." It's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, let's talk about the way too early top 25. The top 10, other than Notre Dame, everybody's in the Big 10 and the SEC. Is this what we should expect going forward? That for the most part, the sport is dominated by the Big 10 and the SEC?
Yeah, and you'll notice who's not on there. Oklahoma, LSU, Tennessee, teams that could, I think nip their way into one of those 10 spots. Absolutely. But I think you're right. You and I have talked about this before. I mean, I think if you're putting an over-under for the 12-team playoff next season, the SEC probably stands at about 4. The Big 10 is maybe at about 3.5. And so when you're talking about maybe 7 of the 12 spots, I think this is what that 12-team playoff is going to look like until, Andy, we both know that they kind of come up with some more parameters here, in a year from now.
Exactly. So you've got Georgia at number 1. And I was watching Twitter as I'm at the national title game, and I saw that Georgia's tight ends coach, he tweets out the face palm emoji as he's watching the game. Like, hey, and the subtext of that is, hey, if we'd have been there, we could have beaten both these teams. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they could have beaten Michigan. But I do know that Georgia still feels like the most talented team in America, still feels like the deepest team in America, and they just played the wrong game at the worst possible time in 2023.
Well, I think the key for Georgia too, Andy, is that when you look at these 10 teams in the top 10 that I have, they probably feel the best about their quarterback. I know, Texas likes Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Ole Miss, Drew Aller at Penn State, Brady Cook even at Missouri. But I think Carson Beck, probably him coming back, him announcing that decision to return for Georgia for 2024, when you couple with the fact you talk about I'm here at the coaches convention, folks still believe that's the best roster 1 through 85, and they believe, based on some of the guys that entered the portal and based on some of the guys that didn't, that Georgia did a really good job when push came to shove of who they were able to keep in Athens for next season.
Yeah, Georgia lost a lot of guys in the portal, but they were not guys expected to be starters or really on the 2 deep at Georgia. And you're right about Beck. I mean, Beck came back to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. That's why he's back at Georgia. I would imagine he also comes back because he thinks he can lead them to a national title. And they did a good job keeping who they wanted to keep. And the question is, they got a meat grinder of a schedule. Like, they open with Clemson, and then the new SEC schedule does no favors to the old East teams. Like, for some of the old West teams, it's the same or maybe even a little bit easier. But for all of the teams that were in the East, it's harder. Like, Georgia's going to Oxford next year.
They are. The key, though, Andy, is that I think that for the Georgias, the Alabamas, even the LSUs, if Baker can kind of fix that defense and kind of bring the best out of a guy like Harold Perkins, you're going to be afforded a mulligan or two, and that's why these schedules are going to be so awesome in terms of some of the non-conference games. Georgia opens with Clemson. They also play kind of an up and coming Georgia Tech team. Obviously, Alabama has the game with Wisconsin. LSU has 2 huge games, UCLA and USC. A 10-2 team can still make the playoff from the SEC, and then it's going to be about your depth. When you're talking about these teams having to play 17 games, Georgia's depth on the aggregate is typically going to win out.
Right behind us, they are trying to clean up confetti at NRG Stadium because there is a playoff game. The Texans host a playoff game this weekend. If you'd like to go, you can get tickets on GameTime. Use the code Staples. Get $20 off your first purchase. You can actually see what your seat it looks like in the app before you buy it. Couple taps, and then you got it. Or maybe you want to turn the page to college basketball. Well, just down the road in College Station, Kentucky's coming.
Ooh.
Kentucky's coming to play the Aggies.
Must-see TV.
So if you want to go to Reed Arena and see Kentucky play the Aggies, get those tickets on GameTime. Easy, easy, easy. Use the code Staples. $20 off your first purchase. GameTime, last-minute tickets, less stress. Just get yourself to the game or the concert or the comedy show because they have tickets for all of them. So use that code Staples, $20 off your first purchase. Yeah, and the thing is, and this is what I figured out this year, is that even the deepest teams are going to have flaws. And with Georgia, we saw when some of their receivers got hurt, it was a little bit harder for them to move the ball against Alabama. And so they're not going to be perfect. And I think that makes this exciting. But if you still said who has the best percentage chance of winning a national title, I think you're right about Georgia. Your number 2 team, though, is fascinating to me for a bunch of reasons. You've got Texas at number 2. Now, I'm with you that I think Texas has done a great job developing the talent they have. This is that big offensive line class is coming of age. Kelvin Banks will be a junior. DJ Campbell will be a junior. And then they're going to lose some really talented players off the defense, but they have a bunch ready to step in.
They do, and they're going to lose both of their top 2 receivers. Xavier Worthy and AD Mitchell are both headed to the NFL. But this is a group that they signed, I think, a couple 5-stars and a couple other blue chippers that got their feet wet this year, kind of getting in some backup roles. Playmaker is not going to be a problem for Texas. CJ Baxter is going to be another year in the system at running back. And I think that, some of the moves Texas has now done, some of the supplemental adding out of the transfer portal that we've seen these best teams do. Who is one of the best edge rushers to enter the portal? Trey Moore from UTSA, guy who, was one of the sack leaders in the country a year ago. Texas is not going to lack edge pressure. And so with him, the continuity with that staff, you keep a guy like Bo Davis in Austin. I mean, maybe Texas won't finish number 2, but I think they have as high of an upside as almost any in the country next season.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is a thought I had watching the Sugar Bowl, and this is actually why I picked Washington over Texas in the Sugar Bowl. When Quinn Ewers is good, he's really good. When Quinn Ewers is bad, it's really bad. Is there a chance Arch winds up starting for Quinn?
I absolutely. I mean, you can't rule that out. And that luxury, Andy, there's just not a lot of other schools that have that. I mean, Georgia feels probably pretty good about their backup situation now that they got Malevieva from UNLV.
UNLV.
I mean, that really gives them some insurance there. But most teams,
but Arch
just don't
Manning
have that
is the
luxury.
best insurance,
right?
Yeah.
But most teams just don't have that luxury. Texas has that, and when you're talking, and I agree with you. I mean, I think Quinn's highs are as high as any, but his lows, you're dipping down into the basement there. And so if that consistency lacks, who is to say that Steve Sarkisian wouldn't turn and say, "Hey, let's hand the keys to the heir apparent already."
Well, and I also think you have to give that assurance to Arch. You have to make sure Arch feels okay with that he has a chance to either win the starting job, or if there's any faltering at all, can step in, because otherwise you're not I don't know if you want to hang around for another year. And he's there. And like the one thing with and Texas is an SEC school now, so we have to remember this. With the SEC schools, you cannot play next year at an SEC school if you didn't enter the portal this past window, which is now closed. So he's there probably. And I think that he's got to have a chance. There has to be a path for him to play if things don't quite work out with Quinn.
Yeah. And again, I think when you're just circling these, this is way too early. We're sitting here talking about, stuff that's going to happen in September, October, here in January. Texas feels really good about its quarterback situation, whether it is Quinn or Arch to start the 2024 season.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and they're going to enter the SEC with massive expectations, which I kind of love. I like that Texas has massive, and I'm sure the Oklahoma fans are like, how come we don't? We're the ones that usually beat them. Well, and you did beat them last year, but Oklahoma's an interesting one. We'll talk about them in a second, but let's talk about Alabama right now, because you got them number 3, and the Crimson Tide just had a situation where they probably would have won the Rose Bowl, and I think they would have beaten Washington had they won the Rose Bowl, but they could not snap the ball effectively in the Rose Bowl, and they did not have a backup center that they felt like they could put in that situation. Again, this is just like I was talking about with Georgia and the banged up receivers. Nobody's perfect anymore. There are no perfect rosters. There are no super deep teams. So if you're Nick Saban, how do you build the most perfect thing you can with what you got?
Yeah, and for me, this is kind of betting on, when I'm making this projection, I'm betting on a year 2 leap with Milroe, making that ascension under a second season, as kind of the anointed dude under Tommy Rees. And then Andy, I mean, guys at our company are as high as anybody on, Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. And so the fact that these, 2 blue chip tailbacks really only got kind of a cup of water, this year, I think they're going to be drinking out of the hose next season. I mean, they're going to be the guys. And so you add them, plus I think Caleb Downs in that defense just isn't going to take a step back, regardless of who fills in for Kevin Steele at DC.
So the Justice Haynes thing was interesting to me. It reminds me a little bit of when they gave Derrick Henry a little more run in the Sugar Bowl against Ohio State after not using him very much in 2014. And I think we're going to see a lot of Justice Haynes early on based on the flashes we saw in the Rose Bowl, which, those of us who follow recruiting, and obviously at On3, we all do, we're very excited to see what he could be. And
I kind of thought it was almost like 2017-18 Najee Harris.
Najee?
Didn't you get those vibes like in the national championship game a little bit?
Well, so the Najee thing in the national championship game, I always felt like was Saban saying, I want to make Tua more comfortable by playing the back he usually plays with in practice with the twos. That's what I always thought that was. Henry, like, I know what the situation with Henry was. I talked to his high school coach about it the year he won the Heisman. Henry went to Saban and was like, look, I'm leaving if you don't use me. And they did. So, I just
worked out.
I just think
good
exactly.
Plan.
So we saw Justice Haynes and a little bit of what he can do. I think it's a reason to get excited. But another group that should be excited. You're number 4. This is the one that I think, moving to a new conference, they've got the NIL thing going better than almost anybody. They've been great in the transfer portal, but they're still getting blue chippers out of the high school ranks. The Oregon Ducks. Dylan Gabriel's coming. Oklahoma had to choose a quarterback. Had to be Jackson Arnold or Dylan Gabriel. They choose Jackson Arnold, who has more eligibility remaining. But Dylan Gabriel joins a very talented roster.
Quack, quack, Andy. I'm all aboard.
Exactly.
I'm all aboard the Duck train. I think that this is kind of they're almost hitting like the perfect storm, I think. They're going to enter a conference where they arguably will have, if not them or either Ohio State, the best 1 through 85 in the conference. They do have a veteran quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. You get a nice backup, at least with a high upside, in Dante Moore. And then Dan Lanning's done a great job at, convincing guys. And NIL certainly is plays a part of it. Oregon is as aggressive as any collective in the country, but of convincing guys to say, hey, let's come back to school. So Tez Johnson, Bo Nix is one of his top receivers a year ago. Yep. He's coming back to school. You get Jordan Birch, the 5-star you got out of South Carolina, transfer defensive lineman. He's coming back to school. The linebackers coming back. So you're getting a lot of returning production. You're adding another top 10, top 5 recruiting class. And we're seeing that they're kicking the tires on some guys that are as good as any in the portal, including Evan Stewart. You land him, quack, quack.
Well, and you've got a Big Ten trio there at 4, 5, 6, and you're going to make people mad because you have Ohio State ahead of Michigan there. And the Ohio State thing's fascinating to me because, listen, existential crisis after 3 consecutive losses to Michigan. The Kyle McCord thing is as weird as it gets. He's gone. They're bringing in Will Howard. Now Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss joining up with the Buckeyes. They're probably going to make some more staff changes, it sounds like. So this could be a really different looking team than the one we saw against Missouri or the last time we saw him full strength against Michigan.
What was the old Andy Staples computer rankings? What were those? The
Andy Staples
rankings?
Show computer laptop organized win nexus.
I think I would have done pretty good with that, right? If I put the team that's never been in the Big Ten at 4,
yes,
against the team that had traditionally won the Big Ten at 5, but has lost it 3 years in a row to the team that just won the national championship at 6. I think I did pretty well on those rankings.
You
by your metrics.
Yes, you set it up for maximum outrage. Maximum outrage. It's beautiful.
The Ohio State's fascinating because I think I'm going to have a piece coming out on this later in the week, just kind of what they've done in the portal. To me, Andy, and you can speak to this. I can bounce my idea off in real time. It certainly seems like Ryan Day, for a guy who's lost less than 10 games, is feeling as much heat as anybody, and he is now reverting back to kind of what I think Urban Meyer's offense was, which is it's less like let's have the firepower, throwing the bombs down the field. Let's get physical and start grinding it out with the quarterback run game. I think they're going to run Will Howard. I think they're going to feed the rock now to Quinshon Judkins. Maybe McLaughlin plays guard instead of center because he can't snap the ball, but he's a quality, at least, just when it comes
to
blocking.
He's a very good blocker. You're talking about Seth McLaughlin from Alabama.
Yeah, he's got that part right. It's just the snapping that was the issue. So it seems to me like they're going back to kind of that Ohio State ground and pound, which was the Buckeyes' path to success.
It's almost as if that's what wins in the Big Ten traditionally and now. It's almost as if that's what won the national title last night.
Yeah, and you know what? And Ohio State had some great receivers then too, and so it's not to say that they're not going to throw the ball to the likes of the number 1 player in On3's rankings, Jeremiah Smith, who they were able to hold on to. I think Ohio State will be one of the most fascinating teams between now and this time next year to see what happens.
Oh, yeah. Now, we can't go through all 25, obviously, but I got a couple that I want to ask you about. So you've got LSU at 13, and I find LSU very interesting. Obviously, they've had to replace the 2 coordinators. One got fired, one left. Blake Baker from Missouri comes in. Blake Baker was a position coach who got fired from LSU on Ed Orgeron's staff, not because of anything he did wrong, but they were firing the whole staff. And now they bring him back as a big money coordinator after a really good year at Missouri. But can he make that defense halfway functional? Because they're going to have a good offensive line. Garrett Nussmeier seems like a quality quarterback. They're probably, I don't know if they'll have the receivers they had with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, but they're going to have good receivers. Can he make that defense even average?
It hadn't been average the last 2 years. It's been
awful the last 2 years.
It's been terrible. It is pretty funny though to kind of put a hammer on the nail that you just kind of spiked there. Brian Kelly determined that Blake Baker wasn't good enough to be on his staff just 18, 12, 24 months ago, and now he brings them back as the highest paid DC in the country. This is, sometimes it pays to be in the right place at the right time, and Baker did that with the returns he got at Missouri. I think the key is, Andy, are they just going to unleash Harold Perkins, and can they get better production out of these blue chippers that they have on the defensive line, because those guys have just not delivered the results. The other thing is the big sore spot has been the secondary. They keep
which is
grabbing all
wild at
these
LSU.
guys. Yeah, I mean, this is formerly DBU, and it's been transfer portal U, but it's really been bust U. These guys have just come in and they've just sprung a leak, and so they have to get those two parts right. Blake Baker did more with less with the Tigers the last 2 years. So if he has a little bit more blue chip options to work with, I know they're trying to hit the portal. I have full confidence that LSU is going to be fine offensively. Replacing Denbrock's going to be a challenge, but they're kind of a pivot team. They could go up or down.
You mentioned how much fun the Big 12 and the ACC could be, not necessarily in terms of the national title race, but listen, the champions of these leagues are probably going to be the 3 and the 4 seed in the 12-team playoff because of the way the rules are set up. The Big 12 is crazy because Arizona comes in, Utah's got Cam Rising back, Kansas State. I'm all in on Avery Johnson. Like I'm ready to go. I made JD Pickell predict who he thought would win each conference, and I picked Kansas State in the Big 12. Oklahoma State, like they're almost always good. They got Alan Bowman back. Kansas, Lance Leipold doesn't seem to be slowing down. Like Jalen Daniels is back. That league's going to be wild.
You know what? What's that quote from the Da Vinci Code where he's like, "Scotoma, the mind chooses the mind sees what it chooses to see." That's kind of how I see the Big 12. I mean, it's like you just named half a dozen teams, and you can create whatever you want to see. That path is there for you that vision is there. You can storyboard it out, and so any of those teams could win the Big 12. That's going to be a fascinating conference. You mentioned Alan Bowman. I mean, I think it's going to be the the Gordon show again for the Pokes, because they convinced him to come back. I'm not unconvinced that the Gus bus down at UCF,
KJ Jefferson, baby.
Yeah, could at least enter the fray there as a potential contender. So really, really fun league. As you said, the fact that one of those teams may be the 3 or 4 seed is probably absurd. But that's the situation we're dealing with.
Got to keep those conference championship games interesting, and they certainly will keep them interesting. You had the ACC, so you've got Florida State 17, Clemson 18, Louisville 19, and Miami at 21. Miami's the one for me that I feel like if they ever put it all together, this could be a league they can take over. Clemson, their refusal to work in the portal, I feel like it's still going down. I'm interested to see how Florida State reloads.
So Clemson seems to have like a December through February problem right now. Miami seems to have a March through November problem.
Yeah.
So it's like which one works out? Cristobal's got all the talent, but the development and the in-game coaching on those September Saturdays is just what's plagued the program. Clemson, their roster is just not where it was when Dabo had these teams winning national championships. I'll tell you the fan base that is lighting my mentions on fire, though, Andy. The NC State Wolfpack are feisty and they are rabid that I did not include them. And NC State, they were one of the French teams. I didn't have NC State in my top 25. I didn't have USC in my top 25. Both of those teams, whether it's in the spring or whenever that we update these rankings, if some other portal dominoes happen, they certainly could find their way into the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is we got to see how these things coalesce. Like Florida State's got DJU now. I don't know if DJU is the starting quarterback at Florida State. He still could be Brock Glenn for all we know. And it really just depends on what happens in the spring with a lot of these quarterback battles. And there's a lot to chew on for these next few months. Jesse, this is going to be a very, very exciting offseason. You got some coaches to talk to, so I'm going to let you go talk to them. Tell them all we said hi.
I will.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.